You're hanging from a bar, just hanging there, feet off the ground, holding your own weight. And your arms are strong. Your shoulders are strong. Somewhere down in your back there are muscles doing their quiet job without the slightest complaint. But somewhere around the 20th second, something starts to go. And it isn't the shoulders. It isn't the arms. It's your fingers. They start to open, not because you told them to. They open on their own, slowly, one knuckle at a time, like they've quietly stopped taking orders from you. And down you come. Now hold on. Let me tell you the strange part, because it's stranger than the falling. There is not one single muscle inside your fingers to get tired in the first place. Not one. Go ahead, wiggle them. Feel the tendons move on the back of your hand. Feel them slide. Those aren't muscles. Every bit of force your grip makes is coming from way up in your forearm, from big cords of muscle sitting halfway to your elbow, pulling on long ropes that run all the way down through your wrist and into each finger. Your fingers are puppets. The puppeteer is hiding up your sleeve. So when your grip failed on that bar, the failure you felt in your fingertips wasn't even happening where you felt it. That's the first thing that doesn't add up, and we've barely started. Here's the second thing, and this one really ought to bother you. While you were hanging there, you were holding perfectly still. Nothing moved. Your hand gripped the bar didn't budge, your body didn't rise or fall. Now in physics, we have a very precise word for what you did to that bar. We call it work. And work has a definition. Work is force multiplied by the distance the thing moves. You pushed, and it moved, that's work. But your hand pushed on the bar, and the bar moved nowhere. Force times zero distance. Anything times zero is zero. So, by the honest arithmetic of physics, you did no work at all. None. You might as well have been a coat hook. So will somebody kindly explain to me why your forearm was burning like you just carried a piano up 3 flights of stairs? Zero work on paper, and a fire in your arm in real life. Those two facts are standing in the same room glaring at each other, and one of them is lying. That gap right there, between the physics written in the book and the physics screaming in your own hand, that's the mystery. And I want to solve it with you. Not hand you the answer, solve it, the way you'd solve any good crime, by collecting clues and throwing out the ones that fool us. Before we go hunting, let me set the scene properly, because the whole puzzle depends on a comparison. Think about everything else your body does all day without quitting. Your legs will carry you for miles. You can walk across a whole city, up hills, downstairs, and your legs just keep going hour after hour. The muscles holding your spine upright, keeping you from folding over like a wet towel, those work every waking minute from the moment you sit up in bed, and you never even notice them. Stand up straight and hold it. You could stand there for an hour arguing with somebody, and your back would not tap out. Your legs, your back, your neck, these are marathon runners. They just do not get tired on the timescales that matter to us. And then there's your hand. Your magnificent, clever hand that can thread a needle and play a violin and pick a single grape off the bunch without crushing it. Ask that same hand to do one simple stupid brute thing, just hold on, just grip and don't let go, and it folds in under a minute. The very same body that will walk you 20 miles can't hang you from a bar for 90 seconds. Something about the hand is different. Deeply, specifically different. And that difference is what we have to find. So let's do what any good detective does. Let's round up the obvious suspects first, because the obvious suspect is usually innocent, and finding out why teaches you something. Here's suspect number 1, and it's the one everybody guesses. Maybe the hand is just weak. Maybe there's simply less muscle down there, less meat to do the job, so of course it gives out first. It sounds reasonable, but it falls apart the second you look. Because we already said the gripping muscles aren't in the hand at all, they're big healthy muscles up in the forearm, and those forearm muscles are not small. So that's not it. But hiding underneath that wrong guess is a real and beautiful fact, and it's our first genuine clue. The difference isn't how much muscle. The difference is how the muscle is wired to your nerves. Let me tell you how a muscle takes orders. A single nerve cell, a motor neuron, runs out from your spinal cord and reaches a muscle, and it branches, and each branch grabs hold of a certain number of muscle fibers. That neuron plus the fibers it commands, we call that a motor unit. It's the smallest gang you can give an order to. You can't fire half a motor unit. When that one nerve barks, every fiber in its gang contracts together, all or nothing. Now here's what's gorgeous. The size of these gangs is wildly different in different parts of your body. In a big muscle built for power, say a muscle in your thigh or your back, one motor neuron might command 1,000 fibers or more. One nerve, 1,000 strands of muscle all yanking at once. That's like a foreman shouting one order and 1,000 men pulling a rope. It's powerful, but it's clumsy. You get the whole 1,000 or you get nothing. You can't ask for a delicate little bit of force out of a gang that big. Your hand is the opposite. In the muscles that run your fingers, one motor neuron might command only 10 fibers, maybe as few as 10, maybe up toward 100, but nothing like 1,000. Tiny gangs. And why on earth would you build a muscle that way? Because tiny gangs give you exquisite control. If each order moves only 10 fibers, you can add force in the finest little increments. You can go from the pressure it takes to hold an egg to the pressure it takes to hold a hammer in 100 gentle steps instead of 3 brutal ones. That is the price of position. Your hand is a virtuoso, and a virtuoso needs fine faders on the mixing board, not one big on-off switch. So the hand trades raw simplicity for control, and it buys that control by chopping its muscle up into a huge number of tiny, separately commanded gangs. And there's an order to how you switch these gangs on, which is one of the tidiest rules in all of the body. When you begin to squeeze, your nervous system does not fire everybody at once. It's polite about it. It calls up the small, weak, tireless gangs first. These are the slow fibers, the ones built to plod along all day and hardly ever get tired. If that's enough to do the job, that's all you use. Only when you demand more force does it start calling in the bigger, stronger gangs, and those bigger ones are the ones that burn out fast. Weakest and most patient first, strongest and most easily exhausted last. We call it the size principle, and it's exactly backwards from how you'd run an army and exactly right for how you'd run a body. Because most of the time you want the cheap, tireless workers and you save the expensive ones for when you really need a shove. Now, a careless detective would stop right here and say, aha, case closed. The hand tires fast because it's made of these fussy little motor units. Write it up, go home. But look closer, because this clue does not actually convict anybody. Slow motor units, the little ones recruited first, those are the tireless ones. They're the marathon fibers. So if your grip were using mostly those, your hand ought to last and last, like your back does. The wiring diagram tells us the hand has beautiful fine control. It does not, by itself, tell us why the hand should get tired faster than your legs. If anything, it deepens the mystery. We found something true and interesting about the hand, and it points the wrong direction. That's a red herring wearing the costume of a clue. So we're going to have to put this piece in our pocket and keep it. Small motor units, fine control, that's real, and it's going to matter later, but it is not the killer. Because notice what we have not explained. We have not explained the puppet strings. Why should it matter that the muscle doing the work is up in your forearm and the feeling of failure is way down in your fingertips? We have not explained the burning. That fire in a forearm that did zero work by the physics book, that is still sitting there completely unaccounted for. And we have not explained the comparison that started this whole thing. Why the very same nervous system that keeps your spine upright all day cannot keep your fingers curled around a bar for one honest minute. Every good mystery has this moment, where your first suspect turns out to have an alibi, and you feel a little cheated, and then you realize the real answer has to be something better. That's exactly where we are. So let's follow those puppet strings up your arm and see what's really pulling them. Because I promise you the thing at the other end of those strings is stranger than the fingers ever were. So up we go, up past the wrist, into the meaty part of the forearm, and here is the first honest surprise waiting for us. You would think, wouldn't you, that a muscle which quits this fast must be built for quitting. A sprinter's muscle. All flash, no staying power. So somebody went and looked. They took those long finger benders in the forearm, the deep one and the shallow one, the flexor digitorum profundus and superficialis, and they counted what kind of fiber they were made of. And you know what they found? Nothing special. The deep one came out around 47% slow, patient, fatigue-resistant fiber, and only about 12% of the fast, explosive burnout kind. The shallow one, about 49% slow, 8% fast. That is not the muscle of a sprinter. That is a muscle built for the long haul, roughly an even split, about the same mix you would find in muscles that work quietly all day long. Now stop and feel how strange that is. The muscle is not the trader. Its raw material is patience stuff, endurance stuff, and yet the whole thing gives out on you in under a minute. So our second suspect has an alibi too. The fibers didn't fail because they were the wrong kind of fiber. Something is happening to good, honest, hard-working muscle that makes it behave like it is falling apart, when by its own construction it should be able to keep going. What could do that? What could take a patient muscle and make it panic? Here is a clue, and it is a beautiful one, because you can feel it in your own hand right now. Make a fist, a hard one. Squeeze like you mean it. Hold it, and watch the color. The knuckles go white, the whole hand goes pale, and after a little while it starts to ache in a way that has nothing to do with the muscle being tired and everything to do with something being cut off. What you are doing when you squeeze is you are strangling yourself. The muscle fibers, when they contract, swell and press outward, and they press on the very blood vessels that thread between them, the little pipes that bring in fuel and carry away the garbage. The harder you clench, the harder you pinch those pipes shut. The muscle in the act of working closes the door on its own supply line. Now this is not some wild new idea. Two fellows named Barcroft and Millen worked this out back in 1939, before there was any fancy equipment to see inside a living arm. They showed that a sustained contraction squeezes down its own blood flow, and the tighter you hold, the worse it gets. And later, people put numbers on it. In the forearm, the blood flow actually climbs as you start to squeeze gently, and it peaks somewhere around 30 to 40% of your maximum effort. Below that, the pumping and the squeezing are still friends. But push past that, squeeze harder, and the flow starts to fall. And by the time you are up around 60 to 70% of everything you have got, in some muscles you have shut the door completely. No flow at all. The muscle is now running on whatever it had in its pockets when the door slammed, and nothing more is coming in. Think about what that means for a rhythmic thing, like walking. When you walk, your leg muscles squeeze and let go, and every time they let go, the blood rushes back in. The contraction itself becomes a pump. You are milking fresh blood through the muscle with every step. That is why your legs will carry you for miles. But a grip is not rhythmic. A grip is a hold. You clench and you stay clenched, and there is no let go, no moment where the door swings back open and the fuel comes flooding in. You are holding the door shut on yourself the entire time. So the very thing you are asking the hand to do, hold steady, is precisely the thing that starves it. And now the numbers get almost funny in how sharp they are. There is an old curve, worked out by a man named Romet around 1960, that connects how hard you squeeze to how long you can last. And it is not a gentle slope. It falls off a cliff. Ask for a big fraction of your maximum and you get seconds. Back off to a small fraction and the time you can hold shoots up enormously. Romet even proposed that if you kept it down around 15% of your maximum, you ought to be able to hold on more or less forever. A little biological free lunch. Later folks poked holes in that, and they were right to, but the shape of the thing is real. A small drop in how hard you pull buys you an enormous stretch of time. And here is where it gets delicious. Because somebody in recent years did the careful experiment. They took 14 young men and had them hold a gentle grip, just 15% of the maximum, the supposed forever number, and they timed how long until the hand gave out. With the arm held out neutral, they lasted about 456 seconds. Call it 7.5 minutes. Now watch. They raised the arm up, lifted it above the heart, so the blood had to fight uphill to get there, and the time dropped to about 390 seconds. Then they lowered the arm, let gravity help the blood pool down into it, and the time went up to about 476 seconds. Same muscle, same 15%, same person. The only thing that changed was how easy it was for blood to reach the hand, and the endurance swung around by a minute and a half just from that. That is the fingerprint of the strangler, right there in the data. Change the blood, change the failure. Blood flow is not a footnote in the story. Blood flow is written all over the crime scene. So there we have it. Case closed. The hand fails because it strangles its own blood supply and no rhythmic pump comes to the rescue. Pack up, go home. Except, I want to show you a trace. Imagine we hook your hand up to a machine that measures grip force, a dynamometer, and we ask you to squeeze as hard as you possibly can and just keep squeezing. Watch the line it draws. First it rockets up to a peak, boom, everything you have. Then it holds, a little plateau, a brief flat stretch where you are still giving it all. And then it starts to slide. Down it goes, and the clinicians even have a favorite mile marker on that slide. They time how long it takes to fall to half of where you started. They call it a fatigue number, a measure of how fast you crumble. Rise, plateau, decay. Every time. And the blood flow story explains a lot of that decay. As the fuel runs low and the garbage piles up, the force fades. Fine, but now I want to ask you the question the strangler cannot answer. Go back to that gentle hold, the 15%, the light squeeze that only takes a small fraction of your strength. At that gentle level, you are barely pinching the pipes at all. The blood is still moving. And yet, 7.5 minutes in, the hand still quits. Why? If there is fuel coming in, if the door is only halfway shut, what exactly is getting used up? What is the muscle spending, minute after minute, holding a weight that, as far as the physics is concerned, is not moving one hair's breadth? And that is the real crime, and I have been sneaking up on it this whole time. Because here is a thing that ought to bother you far more than it does. When you hold a heavy bag perfectly still, when the weight just hangs there and goes nowhere, you are doing no work. I do not mean you feel like you are doing no work. I mean in the strict, cold, bookkeeping sense of physics, the work is exactly zero. Work is force multiplied by the distance the thing moves. And the bag moves no distance, so force times zero is zero. A table does the same job. You set a heavy bag on a table, and the table holds it up all day, all week, all year, and the table never gets tired. Never eats, never sweats, never quits. The table pushes up with real force and does no work and spends nothing. So why in the world does your arm, doing the very same zero-work job, catch fire? Why does the table hold the weight for free while you cannot hold it for a minute? That is not a biology question anymore. That is a physics question with a hole in the middle of it, and the hole is exactly the size of the burning in your forearm. If holding still is free for a table, why is it so brutally expensive for you? Now, most people, when you press them on this, start to mumble. They say, well, you know, the muscle is working somehow. But that is not an answer, that is a fog. The honest thing to do is to stop and look very carefully at what a muscle actually is and what it can and cannot do. Because the moment you look closely at how one of these fibers holds a load, the whole paradox cracks open, and the answer is not about blood at all, and it is not about tendons, and it is not about fiber type. It is about something happening thousands of times a second inside you, right now, in every muscle holding you together in that chair. And once you see it, you will never think of standing still as standing still again. So let us look. Take one fiber, one single strand of the striated muscle in your forearm, the kind with the stripes across it under a microscope, and ask it to do the simplest thing in the world. Hold. Just hold. Here is the trouble. That fiber does not know how to hold. It only knows one trick. A nerve impulse arrives, the fiber gives a little yank, a twitch, and then it lets go and relaxes. That is the whole repertoire. Pull, release. Pull, release. It is like a man who can clap his hands but cannot press his palms together and keep them there. Every clap is over the instant it happens. Now think about what that means for holding a grocery bag steady in the air. You need a smooth, unwavering force. But your only tool is a thing that jerks once and quits. How on earth do you get steadiness out of a machine that can only twitch? You cheat. You do not fire the fibers all at once and let them all fall silent together, because then the whole muscle would shudder, pull, sag, and the bag would bounce up and down like a yo-yo. Instead, your nervous system stumbles the twitches. It fires one batch of fibers, and just as they begin to relax, it fires a different batch, and as those fade, another and another, going around and around the muscle in great overlapping waves, so fast and so jumbled that the individual jerks blur into what feels, from the outside, like one calm, continuous grip. That is the secret hiding in the middle of the paradox. Holding still is not still at all. Down at the level of the fibers, it is a frenzy. It is thousands of tiny contractions and releases every second. A whole orchestra where no player can hold a note, so they take turns breathing so fast that you hear a sustained chord. And every single one of those little twitches costs chemistry. Every one burns a bit of fuel, spends a bit of the muscle supply, whether or not the bag ever moves a single inch. The physics said the work was zero because nothing moved. The physics was right. But the body never got to hold anything the easy way. It had to fake stillness with a blur of motion, and you pay for motion even when it cancels out. And here is the thing that ought to make you sit up. It did not have to be this way. Nature knows another design. Go down to the seashore and pick up a clam. Try to pry it open. You cannot. That animal is clamping its shell shut against you, and it will keep clamping for hours, all afternoon, longer than your fingers could ever dream of holding, and it is barely spending anything to do it, because a clam's shell muscle is not striated like yours. It is smooth muscle, and smooth muscle has the trick your hand does not. It can set. It can lock into a position and simply stay there, the machinery latched, holding the load almost for free. No frantic refiring, no blur of twitches, no burning. The clam is doing the very thing physics said should be cheap. Holding for nothing. Your hand cannot. Your hand was built out of the twitching kind, the sprinter's kind, the kind that can flick and grade and dance, but cannot ever truly rest while it holds. So now, with that in our hands, let us walk back through the whole case, because every clue we picked up along the way suddenly means something different than it did when we found it. Remember the first suspect. We said maybe the hand just has less muscle, smaller motor units, only 10 to 100 fibers taking orders from a single nerve, where a big thigh muscle might have 1,000 or more under one command. We treated that as a weakness. It is not. It is the price of precision. Small units let you thread a needle, turn a key, feel the weight of an egg without crushing it. But look what it does to the holding problem. If your control comes in tiny packets, then to hold a steady force you must keep cycling through an enormous number of those little packets, round and round, each one twitching and fading and being replaced. The fineness that lets your hand be a genius is the very thing that multiplies the number of twitches it takes to stand still. The gift and the curse are the same fact. Then the second clue, the one that surprised us. The fingers themselves. No muscle in them at all. Not one shred. Everything your fingers do is done by muscles buried up in the forearm, pulling on long tendons that run down through the wrist like the strings of a marionette. 30-some muscles ruling the hand, and the strongest of them sitting inches away from the part they move. We found that strange. Now we see the consequence. All that frantic refiring, all that blurred twitching needed to fake a steady grip, it is crammed into one tight, crowded compartment in the forearm. Muscle packed against muscle inside a tough sleeve of tissue. The work of holding your fingers closed is happening in a place with very little room to spare. And that sets up the third clue, the ugly one, the self-strangling. Because those same forearm muscles, firing and firing to hold your grip, are squeezing themselves. A contracting muscle presses on its own blood vessels. Clench hard enough and you pinch those vessels shut and choke off your own supply of fresh blood. the very blood carrying the fuel and hauling away the waste. The flow into a working forearm rises only up to about a third or so of your maximum effort and then begins to fall as you squeeze harder. And somewhere around 60 to 70% of everything you have got. In some compartments, the flow can be strangled down toward nothing. This is why the old measurements are so cruel. Romet drew the curve long ago. Push near your limit and you last only seconds. Ease off and the seconds stretch toward minutes, and he guessed that down around 15% of maximum you might in principle hold forever, though we have learned since that even that is not quite true. And listen to how delicate it is. In a careful study just last year, young men holding a gentle 15% grip lasted around 450 seconds with the arm held level. Raise the arm, make the blood climb uphill, and they failed nearly 70 seconds sooner. Lower it, let the blood come easily, and they held on longer. Same muscle, same effort. The only thing that changed was the plumbing. So do you see how the whole thing fits now? The blood being cut off does not cause the burning by itself. It is an amplifier. The real engine underneath is the striated fiber that cannot hold, that must refire thousands of times a second and pay chemistry for each twitch. The small motor units mean there are more separate things to keep cycling. The puppet string design crams that ceaseless firing into a tight forearm that must sustain the whole load from a distance. And that same relentless firing is exactly what clamps the blood vessels shut and starves the very muscles doing the work. It is a beautiful, vicious little circle. The effort to hold still creates the motion that demands the fuel that the effort then chokes off. And the fiber type, the thing we suspected of being the culprit, the fast twitch sprinter's muscle, turned out to be innocent. Those grip muscles are close to an even mix, roughly half the slow, patient, tireless kind. It was never that your hand is built out of quitters. It is that stillness, for a striated muscle is the most expensive kind of motion there is. That is why your hand gives out first while your legs would carry you for miles. Your legs get to move. Movement pumps the blood, and each step lets a muscle fire and then genuinely rest before the next. Your gripping hand gets neither. It only gets to pretend to be still, forever, with a blur of twitches it can never stop, choking itself as it goes. It is not weakness. It is a virtuoso paying the cost of standing perfectly, impossibly still. And somewhere out in the cold water tonight, a clam is holding its shell shut against the whole ocean, and it will not tire, because it learned the one trick your marvelous, restless, brilliant hand was never given.